Why is it that other countries have high-speed trains zipping across cities, while here in Australia, we're stuck with cars, planes, and long drives? From Europe to Asia, countries are all connected by high-speed rail. But in Australia, we're fed the same empty promises, election after election. Politicians tell us high-speed rail is coming, yet here we are, decades later, and not a single track laid down. So what's holding us back? Why is Australia so far behind? High-speed rail could change travel in Australia in huge ways. Imagine cutting the time to get between Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane by hours. A trip that normally means a flight or a full day's drive could become a fast, seamless journey by train. The environmental impact would be huge too. Trains, especially electric high-speed ones, produce far fewer emissions per passenger compared to planes or cars. High-speed rail could ease up congested highways and airports, taking a load off our current infrastructure. This isn't just a dream. Most Aussies actually want it. Polls show strong support across the states, with people ready to back a high-speed rail system that connects our major cities. The demand is there, but for some reason, the action isn't. So what's the holdup? The demand for travel between Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane is massive. In fact, the Sydney-Melbourne route is one of the busiest air routes in the world. Hundreds of flights zip between these cities every week, packed with Aussies who have no other choice if they want a quick trip. It's clear there's a huge demand for faster travel options along our east coast. So, if that's the case, why haven't we built high-speed rail to match it? Why are we so dependent on planes and hours-long drives for trips that, in other countries, would be quick and efficient by train? For decades, politicians have been promising us high-speed rail. The first serious proposal goes back to the 1980s. Since then, we've had new studies, new plans, and new promises every few years. Each election, the high-speed rail dream gets dragged out, dangled in front of us, only to disappear once the votes are counted. Public patience is wearing thin. We're tired of empty promises, and many people have started to wonder if high-speed rail is just a fantasy here in Australia. When we look at countries like Japan, France, China, and even the UK, the contrast is stark. Japan was the first to introduce high-speed rail with its Shinkansen back in the 1960s, connecting cities efficiently across challenging terrain. France quickly followed with its TGV network, linking Paris to other cities at incredible speeds. China's high-speed rail network has taken things to an entirely new level, covering thousands of kilometers and connecting distant parts of the country with regular, affordable train services. Even the UK, despite its many rail issues, has fast connections that make trains a viable alternative to flying or driving. Meanwhile, Australia is an outlier, missing out on this global trend. Why are we so far behind? Part of it is geographic. Our cities are far apart, with vast stretches of low-density land between them. Countries like France or Japan have dense populations that make rail investment profitable. Here, though, outside Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, there isn't the same demand density, but geography alone doesn't explain it. The biggest issue is political. Our governments think in short cycles, just a few years, focusing on what they can finish quickly to claim credit. High-speed rail takes decades, so no single administration is willing to commit the resources and risk its political capital. Then, there's the cost. Each time a new high-speed rail proposal comes up, the cost is jaw-dropping. Back in 2013, it was estimated that an East Coast line would cost around $130 billion. Now, inflation has pushed that number even higher, making it seem almost untouchable. The price tags spook politicians, especially when they're constantly faced with the risk of budget overruns. So, with a combination of short-sighted politics, massive funding concerns, and the challenge of our geography, we're left stuck in the planning stage while other countries zip ahead. The cost of doing nothing isn't just financial, it's also environmental and social. By relying so heavily on cars and flights, Australia is racking up a serious environmental debt. Air travel is one of the highest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions per passenger, and our busy routes like Sydney to Melbourne are some of the worst offenders. Every time we choose a plane over a train, we're choosing a higher carbon footprint, pushing us further away from our environmental targets. High-speed rail could change that, offering a cleaner, more sustainable way to connect our major cities. Trains, even high-speed ones, have a much smaller carbon footprint than planes, and they'd cut down on the number of cars congesting our highways. Imagine the impact. A shift away from constant road and air traffic toward a modern, efficient rail network would make a meaningful dent in our emissions. Plus, reducing the need for more cars on the road means less road maintenance, fewer road accidents, and less money spent on expanding our highways. The longer we delay, the bigger the toll on both our environment and our economy. Instead of waiting for a massive, all-in-one high-speed rail line that could take decades and billions, why not start with incremental upgrades? This approach has worked for countries like the UK. They haven't built entire new rail lines everywhere, but have instead improved existing tracks. By straightening curves, adding tracks, and modernizing signals, they've managed to cut travel times significantly. For Australia, these upgrades could mean quicker and smoother travel, without waiting years for a grand solution. Imagine the benefits: faster travel between Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, better efficiency for regional trains, and even greater competitiveness against flights and driving. Incremental upgrades would mean we could start seeing real improvements within years, not decades. It's a more practical and achievable step forward and could be just what Australian rail needs to kickstart progress. But of course, there are skeptics. Some say we don't have the population density to make high-speed rail worthwhile. Others argue it's just too expensive. But when you look at the big picture, investing in rail infrastructure could actually save us money in the long run. Fewer flights, less highway maintenance, and reduced emissions add up. Countries around the world have shown that good rail pays off. It sparks economic growth, connects people, and makes daily travel more sustainable. If we keep finding reasons to say no, we'll keep getting left behind. As we wrap up, let's reflect on just how crucial high-speed rail is for Australia's future. We can't afford to keep getting left behind while the rest of the world zips by on efficient rail networks. High-speed rail isn't just about getting from Sydney to Melbourne faster. It's about connecting our cities, boosting our economy, and making travel more sustainable for everyone. It's time for all of us to get involved. We need to engage in conversations about our transportation future and hold our politicians accountable. Let's make sure they know we're serious about wanting real progress, demand transparency in their plans, and push for actionable steps toward building high-speed rail, or at the very least, upgrading our existing systems. Together, we can make sure high-speed rail isn't just a dream, but a reality for Australia. So, let's not sit back any longer. It's time to stand up, speak out, and ensure that our country doesn't get left in the slow lane.